rose in choking clouds beneath the boots of laughing men as the town of Hollow Creek gathered along its splintered boardwalks. The afternoon sun burned mercilessly overhead, casting long, cruel shadows over the woman they dragged behind two horses like some stolen trophy. Her name was Clara Whitmore, a widowed schoolteacher whose only crime had been refusing to surrender her late husband's land deed to Bartholomew Kane, the ruthless cattle baron who owned half the county and all of its fear. Her blue dress, once neat and dignified, was torn and stained with dirt, her wrists bruised raw from the ropes that bound them. Townsfolk peered from windows and doorways, their faces tight with shame, but none dared interfere. Kane's sons, Levi and Judd, swaggered at the front, grinning like wolves as they paraded her past the saloon, the church, and the general store. "Look close," Levi shouted.
"This is what happens to anyone who forgets who rules Hollow Creek."
Clara stumbled, her knees scraping bloody against stone, yet even then she kept her chin raised. They could humiliate her body, but not her spirit. Children were pulled indoors by frightened mothers, old men lowered their gazes, and the sheriff pretended to study his boots. Hollow Creek had long ago traded courage for survival. But at the far edge of town, seated alone beneath the awning of the livery stable, a lone rider watched in silence. His coat was trail-worn, his face half-shadowed beneath a weathered black hat, his revolver untouched at his side. He neither drank nor spoke, and no one knew his name. He had arrived at dawn, leading a tired gray horse, and ordered only water. Yet his stillness carried more weight than Kane's entire gang. As Clara was dragged past him, her tear-filled eyes briefly met his. In that fleeting glance, something ancient and dangerous stirred beneath his calm exterior. He did not move. Not yet. Part 2. The procession ended at the center of town, where Kane himself awaited from the balcony of the Silver Spur Saloon, dressed in polished boots and cruelty. He descended slowly, savoring every second of Clara's degradation, his silver watch chain gleaming against his crimson vest. "Mrs. Whitmore," he drawled, crouching before her battered form, "you had every chance to sign that paper. Pride's a costly thing." He held out the land transfer document, but Clara spat blood at his boots. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kane's smile vanished. In one swift motion, he backhanded her across the face, sending her sprawling into the dust. Then perhaps public disgrace will loosen that stubborn hand. He ordered his sons to tie her to the whipping post beside the town well, a grim relic from frontier justice now repurposed for tyranny. As they bound her upright, the laughter grew louder, uglier, more desperate, as though the men needed noise to drown their own cowardice. But then, a subtle sound cut through it all, the creak of leather boots against wood. The quiet cowboy rose, every head turned. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped from the shade and into the blazing street. His spurs jingled once, softly, yet the sound seemed louder than thunder. Kane narrowed his eyes. "This doesn't concern you, Drifter." The stranger said nothing. Instead, he removed his gloves, finger by finger, tucking them into his belt. The town held its breath. Kane's sons laughed nervously, hands hovering near their guns. "You best keep walking," Judd sneered. Still silent, the cowboy reached up and removed his hat. Beneath it was a face carved by war, grief, and unbreakable resolve. A jagged scar crossed his temple, and his pale eyes carried the cold finality of a man who had buried too much to fear death. An old veteran near the barber shop whispered in terror, "Dear God, it's him." Though many had only heard rumors, the legend was unmistakable. Elias Creed, the ghost of Carson Ridge, the gunslinger who once dismantled an entire outlaw army after they murdered his family. Kane's grin faltered for the first time. Part 3. Elias placed his hat gently atop a hitching post, as though setting aside mercy itself. "Untie her," he said, his voice low and steady, yet edged with steel sharp enough to split bone. Silence crashed over Hollow Creek. No laughter remained. Kane scoffed, though sweat now beaded beneath his collar. "You've got nerve, old man, but nerve won't stop bullets." Elias's gaze never wavered. "I said, untie her." Levi drew first, a fatal mistake. Before his revolver cleared leather, Elias moved with terrifying speed. One shot cracked like divine judgment. Levi's gun spun from his hand, his fingers shattered. Screams erupted. Judd lunged next, firing wildly, but Elias pivoted with deadly precision, his second bullet striking Judd's shoulder and dropping him into the dirt. Panic consumed Cain's men as they scrambled for cover, overturning barrels and fleeing behind wagons. Yet Elias advanced without hurry, each step deliberate, his revolver an instrument of inevitable reckoning. Clara watched through swollen eyes as the impossible unfolded before her. One man standing against terror while an entire town remembered what courage looked like. Cain retreated toward the saloon doors, drawing his gold-plated pistol. "Kill him!" he roared. But none obeyed. Hollow Creek's fear had shifted. It no longer belonged to Cain. As Elias reached Clara, he cut her bonds with a hunting knife, never once looking away from the cattle baron. "Can you stand?" he asked. Clara, bruised but unbroken, nodded. "Good," Elias said, placing his hat back on with quiet finality. "Then stand." Behind them, the church bell began to ring, not by schedule but by trembling hands awakened at last. Doors opened. Citizens stepped forward. Men who had hidden now clenched fists. Women gathered around Clara protectively. For the first time in years, Hollow Creek stood together. Cain looked around and saw his empire crumbling not from bullets, but from broken fear. And in the center of it all stood the quiet cowboy, hat lowered, ready to finish what evil had begun. Chapter 2. Part 1. Bartholomew Cain's polished arrogance cracked like old plaster beneath pressure. The town he had ruled through terror was changing before his eyes, and change was something men like Cain feared more than death. Backpedaling toward the saloon, he grabbed a trembling deputy and shoved him forward as a shield, but the young lawman dropped his badge into the dust instead. "No more," the deputy muttered, stepping aside. Cain's face twisted with fury. "You fools think one gunslinger can save you?" he barked.
I built this town!
"No," Clara's voice rang out, battered but powerful. "You buried it." Her words ignited something dormant in Hollow Creek. Farmers, blacksmiths, widows, and shopkeepers emerged from years of silence. The preacher descended church steps, holding an old rifle from the Civil War. Even Sheriff Tomlin, spineless for too long, finally unpinned his tarnished star and stood beside his people rather than above them. Elias Creed remained motionless in the center, the eye of the storm, his revolver lowered but ready. "Leave," he told Cain, "or be buried here." Cain laughed bitterly, though madness now edged his voice. "You think I'm alone?" He whistled sharply. From the surrounding hills came thunderous hoofbeats. 24 hired riders, Cain's private enforcers, poured into town armed with rifles and shotguns, dust spiraling behind them like an invading army. Terror rippled once more through the crowd. Mothers clutched children, men faltered, but Elias simply tilted his head, calculating. "Get everyone inside," he ordered. Clara hesitated. "What about you?" Elias's expression hardened beneath his brim. "I've faced worse." As townsfolk scrambled for cover, Clara did something no one expected. She refused to run. Instead, she seized a fallen rifle and took position on the church porch. "Then you won't stand alone," she said. One by one, others followed her lead. Hollow Creek was done kneeling. Part 2. Gunfire exploded across Main Street in a storm of lead and shattered glass. Cain's riders charged hard, expecting another easy display of domination, but Hollow Creek had transformed into a battlefield of resistance. Elias moved like living myth, every shot precise, every motion economical. He disarmed rather than slaughtered when possible, but when killers pressed too far, his mercy vanished. One rider toppled from the saddle as Elias shot his rifle clean in half. Another crashed through a water trough after Clara's trembling but determined bullet struck his horse's reins. Windows shattered, church bells rang wildly, smoke curled through town like war reborn. Yet amidst the chaos, something remarkable happened. Ordinary people became defenders. The blacksmith swung his hammer against an outlaw at close range. Storekeepers loaded spare ammunition. Elderly veterans who had once fought under Union and Confederate banners stood shoulder to shoulder, united not by history, but by survival. Kane screamed orders, but fear infected his own ranks now. They had been paid to intimidate helpless townsfolk, not fight a resurrected legend and a town awakened. Elias advanced relentlessly toward Kane, who fired again and again in desperation, splintering wood but hitting nothing. "You should have stayed buried, Creed," Kane shouted. Elias answered coldly, "I did. You dug me up." Their final duel froze the battlefield. Time itself seemed to pause as Kane emptied his last round. Elias drew once. A single deafening shot split the air. Kane's pistol flew from his hand, followed by the man himself collapsing to his knees, wounded and broken. His empire ended not in glory, but in dust. The remaining riders fled into the Badlands, abandoning their master. Silence fell, broken only by ragged breathing and the distant whinny of frightened horses. Part 3. As sunset bathed Hollow Creek in gold, the town gathered in stunned reverence around the fallen tyrant and the man who had freed them. Clara approached Elias slowly, still bruised but standing taller than ever before. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Elias looked toward the horizon, where fading light met old ghosts. "Because once," he said quietly, "no one helped my wife." The weight of that truth settled deeply. He had not ridden into Hollow Creek seeking justice. He had come seeking peace, but evil had demanded the gunslinger one final time. Clara placed a gentle hand on his arm. Then maybe today, she was honored. For the first time, Elias's hardened face softened. The preacher offered him a place to stay. The townsfolk offered land, gratitude, even leadership. But legends were not built to settle. The next morning, before dawn, Elias saddled his gray horse beneath a quiet sky. Clara found him by the edge of town, carrying his black hat. "You forgot this," she said. Elias accepted it with a faint, rare smile. "No," he replied, placing it on his head. "I just needed Hollow Creek to see my face first." As he rode away, children ran after him, cheering. Men tipped their hats. Women wept openly. The town would rebuild, not under fear, but under courage rediscovered. Clara reclaimed her land and transformed it into a school and sanctuary, ensuring future generations would know the truth. Evil survives only when good people stay silent. And somewhere beyond the red canyons and endless plains, the quiet cowboy rode onward, carrying his scars, his sorrow, and his justice into the next forgotten town that needed saving. In Hollow Creek, they would tell his story for generations, not as a myth, but as proof that even in the darkest places, one brave soul can remind the world how to stand.